Today, I'm going to give you a bird's eye look at the changes I'm going to be making to the next edition of Maximize Your Medicare, which is due out sometime next year. So let's just dive right into it. I'm not going to review every clause of the book. Instead, I'm going to give you an idea of the concepts, the changes that I'm going to be making in the next edition. So let's just get started rather than me hemming and hawing a bunch. On your screen is the PDF version of my book. So the first part is introduction, etc. Why is Medicare so confusing? You can see I've left some comments here preparing for the changes that I'm going to be making. So why is Medicare getting so confusing? This is my comment here to this portion. Why is Medicare so confusing? And that this is getting worse, not better. Even the federal government is inconsistently using the names of timeframes in social media and on their websites. So while it may seem like the government is attempting to make it easier, it can leave the wrong impression on those that are looking for the quote, quick and easy. This is just undoubtedly true. You can go to a lot of videos that I've released in other walks of life regarding other financial topics. Ultimately, health insurance is a financial contract. Financial contracts have very specific terms and conditions written by attorneys. For me, it's really important that one of the misunderstandings, misconceptions about the way that Medicare is handled, the way that health insurance is understood by people and misunderstood by people, is the fact they don't understand this fundamental fact. Health insurance, financial contract, the end. The reality is that by not understanding this general idea, you get the idea that, okay, health insurance is a coupon. It's just to push you to create discounts. And therefore you're paying this big price. You don't get a discount. That actually is not what insurance is. Insurance can be thought of as an option. And I do explain that actually. Let's just take a quick look. You can see in the experts addenda down here. Insurance is an option. There it is. My point here is the government has tried to make it simpler, easier, to try to understand what you can and cannot do. The problem is that lawyers write the terms and conditions of these timeframes. Lawyers write terms and conditions of when you cannot enroll, and then enroll in Medigap or Medicare Advantage. From there, the carriers go to calculate. They get given the same rules. They then have to deal with the moving parts. No matter what your philosophical or political views might be, their calculations are independent of that. I promise you that. Down here, ignoring Medicare noise is difficult. My point here is that two big changes are going to ripple through the next edition. The first one is the Inflation Reduction Act, which reduces prescription drug costs on multiple levels. It's not only the fact that there's negotiating power by the CMS with the pharmaceuticals. That's the one that's easy to understand. That's the one that gets all the headlines. The reality is there are more subtle changes and they are more dramatic. First of all, there's going to be the out-of-pocket maximum limit beginning in 2025. In addition to that, the qualification for extra help to use for prescription drug costs to those people who face financial burden as a result of prescription drug costs is actually wider, meaning that more people will be eligible. Currently today, not all the people who qualify for extra help actually receive extra help. You need to apply and you need to then obtain it. There's administration involved. I've given you links on maximizeyourmedicare.com on how to proceed. The prior comment that I made about extra help also affects Medicaid. And I'm going to change this to the next version from instead of Medicaid to call it financial assistance programs. So Medicaid is a complicated soup. It's administered by your individual state, which will have different rules, and then also the application of the rules is largely known to be inconsistent. Nevertheless, these programs aren't fully utilized by those people who qualify. I'm going to try to add extra details into the book to try to encourage those people who do qualify to pursue that path for themselves. Even as financial planner or as insurance producer, I'm not part of any federal agency. So as a result, I can't give you the exact answer about exactly what your outcome will be. However, once we do have that outcome, then yes, then I can assist. As we look through here, Chapter 2, Chapter 3, the structure will stay primarily the same. There are going to be details about the premiums, copays, coinsurance, changes that occur every year. That will be updated, yes. As we go to Chapter 4, I've not yet finalized my comments here, but here we are going to have some pretty dramatic changes. Because the reality is that the complicated calculations involved in Part D and why people misunderstand the coverage gap and how to is going to change notably as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act. Since there's going to be a hard cap of $2,000 on out-of-pocket expenses for Part D, then the ripple effect is going to be that the number of different plans and the terms and conditions of those copays and premiums, deductibles, has to change. We don't know what those exact details are going to be yet. That will have to wait until the very last moment. It's part of the reason that we don't release Maximize Your Medicare, the new edition, during the fourth quarter, because we simply don't have those facts yet. I'll be making comments as we go. Be sure to sign up to the free newsletter where you'll be able to see it in real time when I'm going to be updating as soon as I know. I've stated since the very first edition of Maximize Your Medicare that Medicare Advantage is going to be here to stay as long as you understand precisely how Medicare Advantage works. You'll remember that you need to understand network. You'll remember you need to understand the fact that this is annual contract. That's true for both Part D as well as Medicare Advantage. That's going to continue to be true. The CMS continues to increase its funding of Medicare Advantage plans. This will mean that the carriers are going to continue to compete fiercely in order to win your business. I've already addressed the fact that I don't control what the carriers offer. I'm going to tell you going into 2024 that the reality is that I'm going to be assigning or I'm going to be enrolling and appointing myself with a much wider set of plans than in the past. When it comes to Medigap, not much is going to be different. Medigap continues to be standardized, grandfathered financial contract. The language cannot change for any reason. The premiums can change based on your age, not your individual case. The bottom line is the only one that can cancel Medigap, once you are enrolled and are a policy owner, then the only one that can cancel is you. What has changed slightly is the idea that states can change or modify what exists on top of the federal rules. Certain states have continued to increase, widen, loosen the requirements for a Medigap carrier to accept you, even above and beyond federal rules. My thought is that I'm going to be adding extra emphasis here on this point because this continues to be possible ways to save money for people, to those people who understand and take advantage of the options that are state specific. I've not mentioned it in any other video here, which is the fact that the intense competition that has been brought around as a result of Medicare Advantage has in fact had this secondary effect. I'm convinced, which is, commercially speaking, because the fact that Medicare Advantage has an out-of-pocket limit, and that limit can be lower than the annual premium of Medigap. This has basically forced the Medigap carriers to continue to be hyper-competitive on premium. They can't enhance the contract, although there have been some attempts to add discounts for dental and vision, for example, on top of Medigap, the original Medigap carrier contract, that they'll offer discounts on those. That's entirely possible. For me, Chapter 7, Chapter 8 are the key parts of the book, which is that what usually ends up happening is most people are consumed with the idea about, how to enroll, in avoiding late enrollment penalties, how Part D works, and that's all understandable. The difficult thing about Medicare is that the task is not yet complete, meaning that there are practical decisions that need to be made by people, and that is especially the case now as full retirement age is beyond 65, and people are working beyond 65 whether or not they want to, or whether or not they feel like they're obligated because they want to cover a spouse. Then these extra factors need to be considered in combination with each other. So working beyond 65, we've got this idea that people are working longer. That will continue to be true. Under small employer, the issue here is the fact that small employer insurance, by its nature, is very likely to be more expensive than individual Medicare. So then it becomes a question of the household overall cost and healthcare needs compared to the price that you can access health insurance. As financial planner, this is always my thought. It's not only the coverage, but at what price? Yes, I want a Rolls Royce. I don't want to pay $250,000 for a car. When it comes to small employer, unfortunately, you've been told things that are just simply inaccurate, incomplete. Employers cannot force you out of a plan that is sponsored by the employer. It doesn't matter what the size is, small employer, large employer. However, the quality of coverage and the price then becomes the point, the focal point. Unfortunately, carriers are in on this as well, that they have made it seem as if you enrolling in Medicare and the small employer coverage are necessary and an obligation. The issue then is that the combined price to you is very likely to be much higher than under individual Medicare by itself. As a result, all of this extra money is going to extra coverage that you may or may not need, at a price point which is far higher than Medicare alone. When it comes to Chapter 8, I think that this message is already being leaked out now, after a number of years where I've created this particular organization set up for the book. A small employer is very rarely offering retiree health benefit plans. For large employers, it's slightly trickier, and it is now sitting in the very forefront of the news. For example, in the state of New York, they've tried to convert everyone who is on their traditional plan onto a group Medicare Advantage plan. This has been met with lots of controversy and an uproar in the state of New York. Nevertheless, I don't think that trend is going anywhere soon. It then becomes a question of comparing your large employer retiree benefit plan, which may be a Medicare Advantage plan, and comparing it to the options that you have in the open market as an individual. I'm leaving behind the ideas, the philosophy of the fact that a large employer owes me or that's their responsibility. The actual reality is that I've written Maximize Your Medicare so that you, the individual, can do what's best for you and your household. Nothing else. The reality is that a large employer, let's say they have publicly traded stock, they have other fish to fry. That leaves you to fend for yourself. Something that is actually not necessarily a bad outcome because of the fact that Medigap, Medicare Advantage, Part D are this competitive in the current world. I don't think that trend is going to go anywhere. In other words, that no matter what happens to the Medicare system, you're going to have fierce competition, basically keeping everyone at bay. Because competitor number one is not going to let competitor number three just dominate market share as a result of becoming more competitive with extra features. That simply is not going to be commercial practicality. All the other competitors will respond. The simple analogy is you don't see Honda Accord 2018 edition being the best car in 2024. There's no way that Volkswagen, Toyota, Ford, General Motors, Hyundai are going to let Honda just run the show and just dominate market share without competition or without responses. Everyday people, even if you know nothing about insurance, can see that. It's not clear here on Chapter 10 where on dealing with Medicare problems. I do believe that extra sections are going to be required regarding about the Bennis Act. At the beginning of today's video, I mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act as well as the Bennis Act. The Bennis Act is there to iron out enrollment problems. So far, this year, after just a few months, I've actually noticed additional problems, ripple effects from the fact that the Bennis Act is now law. These have to do with issues that are beyond your control, and now the question will become what practical steps you need to take in order to not overpay and double pay for insurance, and yet also not have a lapse in coverage. This is becoming a more subtle exercise through time. I think that these are the unintended consequences of the Bennis Act. I'm going to be making suggestions on how to deal with those. So without getting even further deeper into the weeds and showing you exactly what changes we'll be making, this is my first look on the changes that I'll be making to Maximize Your Medicare. That doesn't mean that other additions are invalid. It simply means that the world has changed. These two particular laws, Inflation Reduction Act and Bennis Act, have changed the way that I'll be making suggestions, things that I'll be pointing out about Medicare for everyday users.